Welcome to the Jersey Justice Podcast, featuring your hosts, attorneys Gerald Clark and Mark Morris.
Andrew, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we had some tech issues. I was in such a good mood before this thing started, but then we had tech issues and brought my mood down a little bit. But anyway, tell us who you are, what do you do for work, and what brings you here today? Like tell us. We talked before, we talked on the phone. There's been this thing in the news about the surfer in Belmar. Being aggressively asked for his beach badge.
Yeah, it's a long story.
Yeah.
I do appreciate you bringing me in today. I'm happy to be here to talk with you and Mark. My name is Andrew Chambarry. I'm an attorney with Gill Chamas. I do plaintiff's personal injury law, just as both of you are very familiar with. But I grew up in Ocean Township, just 20 minutes from where we sit today. I went to Ocean Township High School, and I grew up going to the beach in Deal and Long Branch. A lot of my buddies were surfers and fishermen, and I grew up spearfishing on the jetties before they were tragically replenished and covered in sand. But that's another story. So for the past 9 years, I've been fighting, and I've been thrust into a fight for New Jersey beach access. And one of the issues that has popped up recently in the news is the arrest of the surfer on August 20th, and then the arrest of a protester for that incident on August 24th. And as an attorney, my pro bono activities have led me towards this path of activism, which, I really enjoy, and I have a history using the beach and helping people like my friends who are surfers and fishermen.
So you want to tell the story about this kid and what happened, or what? You want to give the overview?
Yeah, so the background here, the most recent issue that has surfaced, a surfer was in the water in Belmar, gets out of the water, and he's immediately confronted by a police officer. The police officer, there's some kind of interaction. The police officer asks him for his beach badge. The surfer responds, "I don't need a badge to surf." There are some more words exchanged, and the police officer asks him for identification. The surfer starts walking off, says, the police officer says, "You're being detained, get over here." The surfer continues to walk away, and then it escalates to the point where the surfer is in a headlock and gets body slammed onto the sand, and just chaos ensues with the media.
Did this surfer have any weapons on him or anything? Was he on drugs? Was he being investigated for some kind of crime, or what is that? Why is a surfer being? Wait, first of all, what day? Do you know what day of the week this was offhand?
I think it was a Tuesday afternoon around 4:30, about a half hour before you no longer need a beach badge.
So, and it's sunny, right? We've all seen the video.
Beautiful
It's a sunny day. It's a nice day. There's people around. So it's the Jersey Shore, right? We're not in, I don't know, pick your dangerous, inner city beach somewhere. I don't know. It's in Belmar, New Jersey, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a sunny day. There's people around. People are at the beach to enjoy the beach. And the surfer gets, did you say put in a headlock and body slammed?
Headlock, body slam, detained,
So
cuffed.
he must have had drugs on him, or a weapon or something, or a violent crime just happened.
His crime was not having a beach badge.
First of all, wait, hold on.
Jerry, where do you stand on this issue?
Wait a minute. So wait, let's not assume what in God's name is a beach badge? What is that?
Right. So people from outside of New Jersey typically don't know what a beach badge is, and when they find out what it is,
That's why I asked the question.
they laugh at us.
Yeah.
I saw a lot of comments on Surfline, things like that. What in the world is a beach badge?
What is a beach badge?
So what is a beach badge?
So in 1929, Bradley Beach passed an ordinance requiring, or requiring you to have a badge to access their municipal beach, and only gave that badge to the residents of Bradley Beach. So the purpose of that initial ordinance was to keep outsiders away from Bradley Beach and only to give beach access to residents. Since that time, other municipalities saw in this program a way to make a lot of money. So typical New Jersey, they take this discriminatory practice from the 20s. Over time, it snowballs into you have to pay for access to the beach. You get a badge, and for $10 a day or $100 a season, you pay for your access to the beach. But now we have laws which kind of regulate how much they can charge, who can be charged. And in 1955, the state passed the beach fee statute, is what we call it. So the beach fee statute says that municipalities may charge a reasonable fee for the services that they provide at the beach. So the fees that are collected have to be used for maintenance of the beach, maintenance of restrooms, hiring lifeguards. The fees can be used for protecting the beach, planting dunes, or building jetties. But essentially, all of the money that comes in through beach fees or beach badges has to be spent on the beach. Excess should be refunded to the public and cannot be mixed in with the town's general fund.
So in our part of the world, in New Jersey, there's 4 distinct seasons. We have summer, spring, summer, fall, and winter. So tell everyone, what's this whole beach badge thing? Is it just what seasons is it in? What hours? Like, how's that work?
From what I know, typically it's the summer season, Memorial Day to Labor Day, 7 days a week in some towns, 9 to 4 or 9 to 5 p.m. You're required to have either a daily badge to access the beach or a seasonal badge, which Memorial Day to Labor Day you can access the beach.
So what do these badges cost? What is it like roughly?
Depending on so each municipality can, make their own reasonable fee.
And that's each little town abutting the beach.
Each little town has the right to make their own fees pursuant to what they spend on, maintenance of the beach and lifeguards. So it could be anywhere from $7 a day to $12 a day is kind of the high right now. And seasonal averages around $75, but in towns like the borough of Deal, it's at $150.
So, what do you think or people? Do you think they're inherently good? Do you think people are inherently good, or what do you think about that?
I like to think that people are inherently good. Because
when you told the story about in 1920 or whatever, that some entrepreneurial town father said, "Boy, had dollar signs in his eyes and came up with this fantastic idea of charging people to go to the beach." I was reminded of, I think it was Teddy who started the national park system. Wasn't it Teddy Roosevelt?
Maybe FDR in
think it
like
was
the
Teddy.
1930s.
I'm guessing Teddy.
I think it was FDR with part of the New Deal. But
right.
you might be right that
We'll bet money on that one. All right. I'm thinking it was Teddy. And I think Teddy went to Grand Tetons. Someone took him to Grand Teton in Wyoming, Jackson Hole area. And I have this friend of mine from college. His name's Paul. And Paul would always have this joke where, we would go on trips together somewhere. We'd go somewhere beautiful, like just some incredibly pristine lake or mountain. And he used to joke, yeah, they should put condos up here. You know what I mean? They should make condos here. And so, like, when Teddy Roosevelt went to the Grand Tetons, he was like, you can't put condos here. Like, this needs to be preserved. Mm-hmm. Like, he was really moved, I guess, similar to John Glenn and the guys that go up in space and they see the Earth from afar and they get really spiritually moved by that. Teddy Roosevelt was like spiritually moved by the vastness and the beauty of it all. And Teddy had to then establish a national park system, and that's grown, and we've gotten more acreage. But in New Jersey, when they saw the beauty of the beach and the vastness, what you're telling us is dollar signs somehow came in, and this is a way to make money, or at least it was. So I don't know.
Yes, I mean, so in my experience dealing with these local towns
Yeah.
and these local small-time politicians,
Mm-hmm.
what typically happens, at least from what I've seen, I can't speak to what happened in the 20s, but the beachfront homeowners that pay the most in property taxes usually have the biggest sway with the local mayor and town council. People coming to these access points, may or may not be on the best behavior. Sometimes you have surfers changing in and out of wetsuits, or you have trash, or this or that, and the complaints get back from the beachfront residents to the mayor and the council, and what should really be a police issue turns into an access issue where they say, now we need to restrict the access with either beach badges or parking or one other way.
I know, Jerry, you're going to have your own train of thought, but it's funny because we're obviously going to get way deeper into like the broad strokes of this, but it's kind of so backfired, I think, in the sense where it's like you're trying to limit, undesirables essentially from coming onto the beach. So you start charging beach badges. And then what ends up happening is the people that you don't really want coming because they're not buying beach badges come after hours when there's no one there, when there's no lifeguards, there's, not really a lot going on. I think there's been a lot of issues from that over the years, but I know that's one like little tiny issue in what's a much bigger picture of things to talk about.
So the reason I brought up like Teddy Roosevelt and that whole thing is because, like the beaches. So Teddy Roosevelt came up with the national park system to preserve that stuff, and there's this push and pull. It's funny because we have this podcast, Jersey Justice, and when this issue came up, I'm like, well, that's right in our that's right in our wheelhouse. Yeah. Having a surfer being choke held and thrown to the ground, cuffed and stuffed for not having a, what do you call it again?
Beach badge.
Oh, a beach badge. Yeah. Okay. So, and by the way, and we'll talk about the video, but by the way, it was my understanding, because I'm pretty well versed in public access issues and the beach and stuff. I believe the surfer was right that he does not require a beach badge, and I also understand he did in fact have a beach badge, that it was on his bag. I don't know that firsthand. That's just me listening to the video and seeing the video. But anyway, Teddy Roosevelt did the national park system to preserve this, and we'll do this in a Socratic kind of way. So, and you have this push-pull of, rich residents or rich people that live next to tidally flowed areas, wanting to take those areas for themselves, not for the public benefit. And so you have that pressure, and then you have the pressure of the people that want to provide access. So let me ask you a question. Let's see if you can get this. So Teddy Roosevelt had the national park system preserve it. What's New Jersey's principle to preserve those tidally flowed areas for the use and enjoyment of the people?
Public trust doctrine.
Right. See, you're on it. So tell everyone in New Jersey what the public trust doctrine is, how it relates to all this. So wait, I buy a $3 million house on the Manasquan River, and I'm right across the street from the river, and there's an access point there. I should be able to take that access point to myself, So there's an area where you can get in and out of the river and access the river to go fishing, boating, maybe rowing. And if I bought a house there, why shouldn't I be able to take that and say that's mine, and I should be only able to use that, just me and my family and friends?
Yeah, so this is the part of the story that I'm really interested in as a lover of history and an attorney. It actually goes back to, and it's a very unknown law. Like, it's not something that's thrown around every day, the public trust doctrine. It's really only surfers and fishermen that have any common knowledge of it. But the public trust doctrine goes back to the Justinian Code around 530 AD, when Justinian was the Byzantine emperor. And within that code, there was, the emperor owned all of the tidal lands, where the water ebbs and flows. So not a pond, but an oceanic water, marshland. So the emperor,
Anything that's affected by the tides.
anything affected by the tides.
Okay, go ahead.
So the emperor technically owned that land, but he gave the right to access it to the general public and held it in trust for the public. That principle found its way into English common law. English common law found its way to the American colonies when King James granted the Duke of York, New Jersey. He granted him the land, but the title lands were held by the king in trust for the people. When we won the American Revolution, the right to access the title lands vested in the public rather than in the state government or in any private homeowner. So eventually we have this body of law, common law, called the Public Trust Doctrine, that states that the public has a right to use, to recreate, and to access on tidally flowing lands, whether it be the beach or the Raritan River. And there's a lot of case law that's developed since the 1800s that states various things, like when you can go over private property or when you can access title lands through a marina, this and that. But that's kind of the basic fundamental that all of these issues revolve around. And ultimately you get to a point where you have beach badges and an arrest in Belmar, and you're back at Justinian Code.
So when you have this tidally flowed land, you have the high tide, and you have the high tide. So like if you go into if you go through a river like the Manasquan River or the Shark River Inlet, there's a tide marker on the bridges, and maybe it goes up to 25 feet, and then it go down to 0, and then the tide will go up. It'll go up high maybe to 17 at the peak high tide, and then at the low tide it'll go down to maybe 5, and then at the beach, when it's high tide, the water will come up real far, and then it's low tide, it could go 50 feet, maybe 20 yards. So you'll have 20 yards more of beach. Mm-hmm. So at the high tide, it'll be up a high, and then at the dead low tide, the lowest of the low tide, it'll be maybe 20 yards away. And so what's that area called, that 20 yards that is beach at low tide, and at the head of high tide, it's underwater?
Yeah, so under the Public Trust Doctrine, the public has a right to access the wet sand beach and a reasonable amount of the dry sand beach. For instance, if it's high tide, there's a reasonable amount of dry sand that you should be able to access. And you should be able to access the wet sand and a reasonable amount of the dry sand without a fee if your sole purpose is to walk the high tide line, to recreate, to launch a canoe, kayak, fish, or surf.
So
No.
So what you're saying is that the public has essentially an unimpeded right of access to the tidally flowed lands, so that they can access, in this case, the ocean, and that they shouldn't need a beach badge for that, to simply go from the street or the boardwalk directly to those tidally flowed lands?
Exactly.
And who says that in New Jersey?
So there's common law that says that. There's NJDEP regulations that say that, and Governor Murphy in 2019 codified the Public Trust Doctrine into a statute. So there's a statute now that says that, a New Jersey law that's on the books.
And you said common law when you were talking about how it came from the Byzantine Empire, and this principle of the Public Trust Doctrine was transferred to England via what you said was the common law. And then you said we have common law here in New Jersey as well. So what is common law, so people know?
Yeah, so when I was explaining the common law, I'm not too familiar with the Old English or the Byzantine Empire, but I know that in 1821 was the first case on the books in New Jersey where the Public Trust Doctrine was enunciated. So common law are judicial cases and decisions that have come down over the years that make up a body of law.
So, for example, Roe v. Wade was common law, right? Sort of?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it's a federal case.
Yeah.
Some people will question whether or not there's federal common law. But the way I see common law, like how common law started, is, let's say we have the Old West in the United States, and then you would have these circuit judges. So like here in New Jersey, you know, you got your municipal court judge, you got your judges in Monmouth County and Freehold, you have your judges in Trenton, there's judges sitting in federal courts in Newark, and you can go there any day and you'll see them. But way back in the Old West, they had these circuit judges. And like if you had a dispute with your farmer next door, you had to wait 8 months or 6 months till the circuit judge was on his circuit and was going to stop by your town. And then when you knew the judge was coming, you'd try to get together and resolve this with the judge. I think that's how the circuits started. The judges would go on the circuits, and then so that they didn't. So they say, you know, okay, the farmer killed the 2 sheep, so therefore the neighbor, you know, you killed the farmer's sheep, so that person that killed the sheep has to pay for each sheep, right? And then that's what they decided. So then they would write that down in books so that the next time a farmer killed the sheep, they wouldn't have to have a big, long thing about it. They would just go back to that prior case that said, well, that's what we did there, so that's what we're going to do again. Is that essentially common law? And then they would write that down in a book?
Yeah, exactly. So in 1821, the first case is Arnold v. Mundy. And Mundy was a guy who knew a very good spot to collect oysters on the Raritan River. And so he would access the river at low tide, walk up and down, collect oysters. And Arnold was a rich landowner who didn't want Mundy on his property. So Arnold filed suit to, or brought charges for trespass while this guy was collecting oysters. And the court ultimately found that Mundy and the public have a right to these tidally flowing lands under the public trust doctrine. And now that decision was on the books, just like you said, that goes down the line to create more decisions where judges will rely on that prior decision, and then maybe a new set of facts comes along, and they create a body of law that we know as the public trust doctrine today.
Well, that I keep thinking of like stare decisis, or whatever that is, the concept of like let the thing stand. Where I was sitting here trying to rack my brain of like how best to define common law too, and I'm thinking like start with the Magna Carta, and then just, it just seems like it's basically principles of fairness that, like you guys have talked about over time, it's been, okay, this is how this dispute was resolved. Because it's not like it took that decision that you just talked about with Arnold for the public trust doctrine to come into existence. You're saying that has existed for centuries upon centuries, and now we have case law that reinforces that, and then something to build off with that going forward. Is that kind of accurate?
Yeah, exactly. Like it had existed in the past, but that was the first instance in New Jersey where it was written down and enunciated by a judge.
And it looks like, too, there's been quite a bit of case law since then on this issue, this public trust doctrine, and kind of how it plays out.
Yeah, there's a lot of case law on it, and some of it revolves around Belmar, and some of it revolves around beach fees. So it's interesting.
And I know Jerry asked you about, you gave the example of like, you know, some rich homeowner, which it seems like that's a lot of times how these cases.
The first case started that way, you said Mundy and
first case.
And I'm sure behind the scenes and in much smaller scale, less, you know, Facebook video context, a lot of these public trust doctrine issues probably play out summer after summer and year after year. But what about with respect to like municipalities that own, you know, not own, I guess, but are towns that come up to the tidal flowing waters, the beaches and things, like what obligations do municipalities have under the public trust doctrine?
So municipalities are supposed to be the stewards of public trust lands, particularly when you have municipal beaches where the municipality, like Belmar, they own the beach, they regulate the beach. They have to be an advocate for the public, and they have to advocate the principles of fairness and equity enunciated by the public trust doctrine. So municipal mayors and council, you know, they should be passing ordinances that are consistent with the public trust doctrine, that allow for more access, not less access, that relax fees, not increase fees, that give more access to the general public rather than shrink access. But a lot of municipalities, mayors, council men and women, you know, aren't really familiar with the public trust doctrine, don't even know that they have this obligation that's enunciated in case law.
And just for like, I know we're all intelligent people probably listening to this too, but when we say municipalities, it's a fancy way of saying towns.
Yeah,
like we
towns.
talk about Belmar, Spring Lake, whatever it may be.
You know, I grew up at the beach. Like I was a little beach bum, grom. You know, and I feel like humans evolved from the ocean. Like, you know, you see that old picture of this
Crawling out of the
lizard, weird looking thing with a tail crawling out, and that's early humans. You know, and like whales. Did you know whales are mammals? What do you mean? No, they're fish. No, whales are mammals. So that kind of is like the connection. You know, I guess a mammal is anything. Is it with hair and that breastfeeds essentially? Is that a mammal?
I think what is it? You gotta have a vertebrae. You gotta. I think breastfeeding sounds about right. You produce milk.
And hair. I think hair was one of them. But so like
we might be putting out some misinformation about mammals and about which Roosevelt developed the national park system.
I know. We'll see if YouTube flags us for that, but for fake news. But so whales. I never knew. I mean, I did eventually, but it was always surprising to me that you could actually drown a whale and you can drown a dolphin or a porpoise. And the way orcas, so what orcas will do, like if an orca pod wants to kill a dolphin or something, they'll drown it essentially.
Wow.
And that's like our connection, you know. So like in a way, I guess we're connected to whales and dolphins in that mammillary chain of evolution. And like you were saying, you have that old picture. Or that weird picture of this thing coming out of the water, and that was an early mammal. And there's still animals that are in the water, and then they come out, and then the lake dries, and then they survive in there for a bit, and they breathe air, and they breathe underwater. And so anyway, that's a long, weird way of saying that I think humans have a real connection to the ocean. And, you know, I spent a lot of time at the beach. I still lifeguard at the beach. That's my part-time gig. And you see people come down the beach and they're just in great moods. Like there's something cleansing about going into the ocean, into the salt water. You know, it's healthy. I feel like it cleanses the mind. It cleanses the soul. And pretty much at the beach, like, because I spent a lot of time at the beach. Okay, people are generally not in bad moods. It's like a nice place. It's a cleansing place. It's a relaxing place. So I think that's like about this whole thing. That's like part of it, you know, because we can talk about this video and we can talk, and maybe Mark will give your view from an old prosecutor, law enforcement perspective. If the surfer was technically right or technically wrong, but there's a spirit to the whole thing, you know? There's a spirit to this that you just shouldn't get choke held and slammed down at the beach for accessing what, like, I'm sure the Byzantine Empire wasn't the most democratic, people-friendly, people-friendly government in the world, but even that government recognized the right of people to use and enjoy the tidally flowed lands for recreational purposes. So like the beach is cleansing and it's supposed to be a nice place. Not to mention it's sustenance for people. That's why fishing access is so important. So anyway, go.
No,
go
I
ahead.
mean, you mentioned the video, but
I got to stop talking about dolphins and mammals and stuff.
No, I mean, but you're right. I mean, you talked about the video. I'm sure a lot of people who are listening to this have probably seen the video. I think we'll play it at some point, but you hear the crowd that's gathered, like, what are you doing? They're screaming. They're like, you see interviews after, they're like, I've been coming here for 50 years. I've never seen anything like that. You know, and I think, again, it's a tough dynamic on a number of sides, because how do you handle a situation like that and the optics of it and things? But you're right. Like when people go to the beach, like you sit down in your chair and you go,
exactly.
And you get in the ocean and you sit there and you think, man, why don't I do this more often? I feel great.
Like if you speed on the Parkway, the Parkway is one of the main highways in New Jersey, and the speed limit is 65. Okay, so if you go 66, you can get pulled over and get a ticket, right? So if someone's going 66 on the Parkway and they get pulled over by a state trooper, and sir, driver's license, registration, well, what am I being pulled over for? Sir, driver's license and registration. Okay, I'm getting it, but what did I do wrong, officer? Let me see it. You were going 66. I'm like, but the speed limit's 65, right? And you went over it. Okay,
Yeah.
so technically, Mark, the officer would be right. He would be legally right to give the person a ticket.
Yeah.
But is that the vibe on the parkway, that if you go 66 you get pulled over? And is the vibe at the beach that, and let's just assume for a minute that the surfer was technically wrong in the scenario, just like the driver was technically wrong for going 66. Is that what the beach is supposed to be about?
I think just to draw a distinction, because I guess now we're getting into the actual video itself. And I think actually the town of Belmar.
I mean, there's a baby crying in the video. There's a
Yeah.
surfer getting slammed that had no weapons or anything on him.
Yeah. And
Is that what the beach is supposed to be?
I think to say, is that what the beach is supposed to be about? The answer is probably no,
Yeah.
But it's not like the beach, though, is a totally just demilitarized zone where anything goes. I mean, I've seen through lifeguarding myself all the time, like open container violations. If someone gets into a fight on the beach or something, you're not just like, just let that go. It's the beach. So I guess
That's a good
there
point.
there
That's a
does
good
need to
point.
be some enforcement mechanism there. And, how it gets handled is probably a different discussion. But I think either Belmar, the town, the mayor, or the chief, or maybe all of them came out and said that the surfer in the video, he wasn't arrested because he didn't have a beach badge. I think it came out that he was arrested because they said, hey, show us your credentials, show us your badge. And the guy was like, I don't need to do that, and just started walking away. So at that point, it's to your example, it's like they had pulled a guy over for going 66 on the parkway. And they said, give me your license and registration. He said, no, I don't need to do that. And they said, get out of the car. He says, no, I'm not getting out of the car. Then that driver who was doing 66.
Yeah, I just think that, Jerry, like you were saying, it's a spiritual place. You don't expect to see police officers in full uniform coming at you.
An armed police officer. He was a class 2. He was a retired full-time officer in New Jersey, by the way. When you retire and reach the retirement age, you can't be a class 1. What's the officer? It's class 1, right?
I believe so. If you're special, essentially, I think.
Is 1.
Yeah,
I think it's class 3. Class 3 is a full-time officer with a weapon, right?
my classifications, aside from like patrolman, sergeant, like all that, I don't remember necessarily with the specials what those classifications
All right, so
are.
anyway, in New Jersey, if you're a full-time officer, you reach the retirement age, you can retire. You can't then go back during retirement and be a full-time officer, but you can be a class 2, which is where you can carry a gun, but you're retired. So it's like part-time, extra money after retirement. So this particular officer was a class 2 officer, very experienced officer with a weapon. And then we have the special officers. He's a class 2 special, and then you have I think it's class 1 or class 3. It's one of the two. Mm-hmm. But anyway, they're basically college kids. They have no weapons, no guns.
And they're just for the summer.
They're just summer. Okay, so have one of those kids go up and talk to the surfer. Because again, you could say the officer was technically right, but was he right in the spirit of the public trust doctrine, in the spirit of what the Jersey Shore is supposed to be? Have one of the summer kids specials go up and nicely ask the kid for a badge and work it out. Instead, when you look at this video, it's like I'll promise you're going to be arrested. I mean, come on, that's not what the beach is supposed to be like.
Yeah.
I grew up there, I'm there all the time. And under no circumstances shown in this video should a guy be choke held and slammed down. That's why I asked you, Andrew, when we started, did he have needles on him? Did he have a weapon? Did he accost someone?
Definitely a bar of wax in his wetsuit.
Oh,
which
yes,
he
the bar of
advised.
wax.
Yeah.
It's like, he's like, put down that surfboard. Like you see
Yeah.
these crazy videos on YouTube, like put down the gun, put down the weapon, And listen, I'm the first to say, because not all cops are bad, and some are really good rowers. Just for some of my friends out there,
And good neighbors as well. And
so like not all lawyers are bad, not all cops are bad, not all anyone is bad. So at no point, in my opinion, should we be like, oh, these cops, they're all like this. Just one bad apple or one good apple having a bad day shouldn't spoil the whole thing.
And I think we should point out too just how strange this circumstance is. Typically, you have badge checkers at the beach access point. That's where, high school kids that are hired for the summer, they check the badges, or they'll sell you a daily badge for the day. Never in my experience being on the beach have I seen police officers criminalizing the beach walking up and down checking for badges. Sometimes you have badge checkers do that because people may come from other beaches and they might sit on the dry sand. But that, I think, is what's so strange about this situation, that there are police officers checking a surfer getting out of the water.
It's funny because now I'm trying to put together.
And I have to say, an armed officer that was promising he's going to arrest him and throw him in the ground within, 5 seconds of the initial contact? He's threatening that? That's not right.
No.
So it sounds like, too, just by background, Jerry said he's grown up at the beach.
Yeah.
He's still lifeguards, obviously has a strong connection to the beach. I grew up going to the beach. I went to Manasquan, and then I lifeguarded in Spring Lake. Now I actually go to Belmar Beach. And so I'm trying to put together the pieces because what you mentioned about police going up and down checking for badges, that happens at Belmar Beach every once in a while.
Is it the Class 2s with the guns?
It's usually the special officers that are doing it, and it's
more the summer
just
kids. The kids.
Yeah, it's more, I think, them just having eyes on what's going on, and if
Right.
they see a problem, then they probably bring in the Class 2 or the armed officer.
Right.
So what I keep going back to with this particular situation as well is what is the full context? Because at first the one video came out where it's the kid, looks like he's handcuffed, he gets thrown to the ground.
Yeah.
You're like, ooh. And then you see the additional 4 minutes where you see the police giving him directives and him walking away, and you're like, oh, okay. So I don't know the full context. If at first one of those...
I still wasn't okay when I saw the full video. I was like, that's actually worse.
I agree. Not that it's okay, but you have a little bit more of the full picture. And then
definitely.
I wonder with this as well, if at first just the regular kind of the special officers, call it, had walked by and said something and they gave them a hard time. And I don't know enough of the facts. So this is just speculation.
He just came out of the water.
Yeah, I think ultimately there's a fundamental misunderstanding of the law by the Belmar Police Chief, perhaps the Belmar Mayor and Council, and surfers and fishermen that know the public trust doctrine.
Well, and it sounds like, too, we should probably get into this soon, or if not next, but it looks like Belmar's actual ordinance on that issue might be part of the problem, too. Because I think the police officer... And again, I'm not taking sides on this. I grew up, my dad was a police officer for almost 30 years. I worked for the prosecutor's office for a year. I essentially, at the end of my tenure with the prosecutor's office, was like, this isn't for me. I respect people who it is for, but I love essentially advocating for people who have gotten injured, trying to get them compensated. So I'm almost always on the side of the little guy, or the guy that seems like he's getting oppressed, which here clearly would appear to be the surfer. But I think I kind of come at it from a little bit different perspective, where I know essentially what the elements of what he would be theoretically charged with would be, whether or not the state could potentially meet those elements, and then what the kind of black letter of the law says with respect to what the surfer's obligations were and what the town ordinance was on the issue. And I have to kind of tell one little anecdote about, Jerry, you kept asking about the spirit of the beach and things, and the spirit of the beach absolutely is not people getting thrown to the ground and getting arrested. And a case I handled that I'll share that I know doesn't paint me in a great light. It was the second thing I did with the prosecutor's office. This guy had a daughter who was in a wheelchair, and he came down from Ohio. He was visiting the beach, and he needed a key to unlock the wheelchair ramp so he could push his handicapped daughter up onto the beach. And so the beach sent him to one end of the town. It was like, that's where you got to go to get the key. So he goes there. They're like, oh, it's not here. It's at the other end of town. So he goes to the other end of town. They're like, oh, we don't have the key here. It's back at that first end of the town. So the guy visiting from Ohio with his family goes back and forth from one end of town to the other. And finally, he rips open the door to a beach hut. He's like, where is the effing key? And they so finally gets his daughter on the beach, but the hut he ripped open, the woman in there was the town councilman's wife or something. So the entire police force from this tiny beach town, 4 or 5 cops come. His daughter is in one of those beach wheelchairs. They arrest the guy, handcuff him, throw him down. I don't recall actually if he got thrown down, but I do recall his daughter was so shaken up by the thing. She had a seizure, fell out of the wheelchair, and they charged this guy with criminal mischief, obstruction. They charged him with everything and more that this surfer was charged with. And it was the second case I ever had to argue for the prosecutor's office. Wow. And I got up there and I had my brief ready. I was like, we've met every single one of these elements, and I was so young. All I cared about was I have to win this case. Yeah. And I got there, and there's a news station out front, and I say to the sheriff's officer, I'm like, anything going on today? Yeah, some guy couldn't get his daughter on the beach. The news is here. So it's my second case ever going to argue it. And I remember I'm like, he violently and tumultuous, and the judge is basically up there shut up, stop. So he calls me up after. He's like, look, you did a good job arguing, but there's some things where like you might have the law on your side, but you gotta. And I think that's what's going on here. Is you look at the court of public opinion and the optics.
But wait, so what's the outcome of your case?
The outcome, the judge did the absolute right thing. The judge threw the whole thing out. Like the municipal court had convicted of all of those charges, and they appealed up to the Superior Court, and the Superior Court judge absolutely did.
So you lost that case.
I lost that case.
Mark, that's like that hits the nail on the head of this whole thing.
And that's what
doesn't it, Andrew?
I keep circling back to that because I'm like, I have every element that this guy, he destroyed property, he cursed at someone, is that tumultuous behavior. I had all of those elements, and I was like just looking at my win-loss column, and I was like, this should be a win.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't have been. It should have been a loss. So that's what I keep going back to with this. Like, are the elements of these criminal offenses potentially there when he doesn't listen to the police officer's directive? They probably, we're not deep enough in the weeds on it, but are they probably there? Yes.
But the judge did the right thing there.
And that judge is on the appellate division now as well. Excellent judge. He's
Can we say the name of the judge?
It's all probably public record.
That's
but
fine.
Yeah, but he did the right thing. He taught me a valuable lesson too. And with this, I think I'm curious to see how it all does play out.
But even if the surfer in the video that we're going to show or that everyone has seen, even if he resisted and was disorderly, he was still charged with violation of a beach badge ordinance that I think is invalid on its face and not consistent with the public trust doctrine, which is really what I'm concerned about. Why were the police there in the first place? Why are they checking for badges? Ultimately, I don't think beach badges should be instituted in New Jersey whatsoever.
I was on the fence about that because by the way, so everyone knows, Andrew, tell us a little bit more about your advocacy on these issues and what you got going on right now in terms of your view on and how can people contact you, get involved? We're going to put it in the show notes, but tell us about your advocacy and the stuff in terms of the beach badges.
Yeah, so we didn't really touch on it in the beginning, but there's a much longer and more complex history with beach access and my involvement. So fresh out of law school in 2015, the borough of Deal, which is a very small municipality on the Jersey Shore, tried to pass an ordinance that would restrict parking on all sides of the streets from Ocean Avenue to the beach. Now, in your head, that might not sound too bad, but the areas where they were trying to pass this ordinance are multi-million-dollar homes, and the underlying reason why they were trying to pass no parking was to keep surfers, fishermen, and the quote-unquote riffraff away from these multi-million-dollar homes.
Multi-million-dollar homes, which, by the way, are only occupied how many months a year typically?
Memorial Day to Labor Day.
Yeah.
Mostly just on the weekends, probably.
Mostly just on the weekends.
Yeah, all right.
Right, so locals like me, we've been using these.
Why shouldn't rich people be able to take the beach for themselves? They worked hard in life. I don't know. I do this. Like, what? Yeah. Why is
Well, because our taxes actually pay for that beach.
Bingo.
So the federal government, in a cost share with the state and local municipalities, have replenished those beaches. Millions of dollars have went onto those beaches. So not only you and I and Mark, everyone listening, but anyone that lives in the United States, because there's a federal component, have gone to creating these beaches. Therefore, there's even more of a reason why the public trust doctrine is entrenched in New Jersey beaches now, is because we actually paid for them. So one person or one homeowner cannot stop the public from something that they've paid for. It's just fundamentally unfair.
What's crazy is it's been going on since the Byzantine Empire and before, and in New Jersey since what was the year, 21?
1821.
What was the name of the owner and the fisherman?
Arnold v. Mundy.
So Mundy was the fisherman or the owner or the homeowner?
Arnold was the homeowner, and he filed a trespass action against Mundy.
It sounds like a law school fact pattern, like
right?
a case
like
you would
tort
learn about.
case.
Yeah.
So this is like, because we talk about this podcast, Jersey Justice. We've had some guys on and talking about civil justice systems. So tell us your experience, Andrew. Like, hey, the public trust doctrine's there, the law's there. Why do we need an Andrew Chambarry to do like what is this? Like, the law's there.
Yeah. So, kind of back to what I was saying before. This issue popped up in Deal. I had just graduated law school, and a couple of my buddies who are surfers and fishermen in Deal and Long Branch said, hey, you're a lawyer now, do something about this. Why isn't there some kind of public advocate, or why isn't the DEP stepping in? These kind of things. It really is a grassroots movement right now.
What's the DEP?
The New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection.
And they have jurisdiction over issues like this, including the tidally flowed areas.
Yeah, there are regulations that give them the right to enforce regulations and laws and basically oversee that everyone's doing the right thing consistent with the public trust doctrine. But unfortunately, since, in the last 10 to 15 years, it's been community organizations, grassroots. So I created a Facebook group that initially had some 3,000 people in it. We launched a petition on change.org back in 2015 against Deal, and because of the public pressure and the news that the news organizations and the press that we brought in against Deal, they ultimately tabled or tossed the ordinance. 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times they tried to restrict parking in Deal, and we fought it every single time, and we won every single time until ultimately Deal tried to sell a beach access point to a developer for $1 million. And that's when I had to get the American Littoral Society involved, raise money for a lawsuit, fund a lawsuit for multiple years, and ultimately we won that lawsuit with the help of many people who donated and American Littoral Society litigating the case, but they didn't win it on a public trust basis. They actually won it because Deal didn't have the right to sell pursuant to some 1800s deed in the first place.
And listen, being a personal injury lawyer, plaintiff's lawyer, trial lawyer, how much money did you make on that case?
Zero. So I make $0 from doing all this. It's just pro bono. I have a passion for it.
Yeah, you're citing the case law offhand. Yeah. And you talked about there used to be a position, maybe we talked, I think, before we were on here, there was a position that was dedicated to making, sure things like the public trust doctrine was being implemented and followed. Does that position still exist?
When I started researching the public trust doctrine and reading the case law, there was a position in Trenton called the public advocate.
The Office of the Public Advocate.
And that was dismantled by Christie in 2011.
It wouldn't be a Jersey Justice podcast without mentioning Chris Christie.
All right, so let me get this straight. So the legislature passes legislation which establishes essentially an office of lawyers that advocate on behalf of the public for things like beach access.
Exactly.
And that was in place for many years, and then Governor Chris Christie decides to abolish the Office of the Public Advocate.
Correct.
So now there's no longer a government-funded office dedicated to advocating on behalf of the public, which is where people like you come in and having done that awesome thing in Deal.
Yeah, so we don't have an advocate. We do have the NJDEP still, who you can file a complaint with, and they're supposed to look into these sorts of things, but things happen all the time, and they don't have the resources or the manpower to look into everything. So now we have a Facebook group called, if you want to look for it online, it's called COBRA, Citizens in Opposition to Beach Restricted Access, which I thought was a fun acronym.
It's also a kayak, I think, brand name.
I liked COBRA, so we went with that. So you can look for us there, and that's kind of where anyone up and down the shore, if you see an access issue, if you're denied access by a municipality or an agency, post it on there. We'll help you out. Just last week, one of my buddies was denied entry to Seven Presidents Park in Long Branch, which is a county park. So now we have to go against the county park system. So I wrote a lengthy letter, CC the DEP on it, get a complaint number, and try to go about these issues kind of that way.
Just in because I know we hit on this, but just in the simplest terms, what's your interpretation of the public trust doctrine with the issue of, surfers, fishermen, and people accessing those tidal waters? Do you need a badge to do that?
Yeah, so this is something that we should definitely talk about, the beach fee statute. So municipalities may charge a reasonable fee for access to the beach when they're providing services. So some of those services are lifeguards, bathrooms, maintenance of the beach. So when you're sitting on the dry sand they can charge you to sit there because they've cleaned it and they've used their beach sweepers and that kind of thing at night, what you usually don't see. But when you're not using those services, my interpretation is that you should never be charged a fee because you're not using the services that the fees are supposed to go to.
Which is for the dry sand, essentially, not the wet
Exactly.
sand,
So
not the tidal.
if you're just walking through a badge checker to walk to the wet sand and up and down the beach, you're not using any municipal services. You're not using the lifeguards. You're not using the maintained beaches. You shouldn't be charged. If you're surfing, you take your board, bypass the badge checkers, go down to the wet sand, jump in the water. Surfers don't want lifeguards. Surfers don't need lifeguards. That's maybe something we could talk about as to whether the lifeguards are watching the surfers or watching the swimmers. But technically, I think surfers should not have to pay because they're not using services. Fishermen are not using municipal services. And basically, I think the crux of this whole issue is what are you or are you not using municipal services? That's the test for whether or not you need a beach badge.
Well, if a officer is putting you in a chokehold and throwing you down to the sand and cuffing you and stuffing you, aren't they using the services of the officer? I mean, wasn't the officer trained to do that? And those handcuffs are paid by the public, so I don't know.
Yeah, right. Well, so when the surfer came out of the water and he said, "I don't need a badge to surf," was the first thing he said.
He was right about
He was
that.
right, and that's what pissed the officer off, and that's what started the whole escalation.
Okay, but not to go on here saying all this, but I heard the officer had a bad day. I heard the officer was accosting people in the days before and getting into it with people, and was just had it out. He was just ready to go. I mean, the video kind of shows that. I don't know. That's what I heard, and then I heard from people. I'm like, I heard from people that, oh, he's a really nice kid. He's a great kid. He's a local. And on the video, he's asking for Harry Harson to come to his aid. Harry Harson is the lifeguard chief in Belmar. I think the surfer was either a lifeguard in Belmar previously, or his family was, or he knew people, or knew Harson. And on the video, Mark, when he says, "Get Harry over here," what? Are you kidding me? That's really going back to what we talked about before. What's the beach supposed to be? Harry Harson knows the beach. He knows the vibe at the beach. Mm-hmm. I'm a surfer. I'm a local, and like that. What my interpretation when the surfer's like, "Are you kidding me?" and the sister is, What are you doing?" Like, they're right in that. Like, what are you doing? This is the beach, yeah. And
I think it goes to your point, though, Andrew, that there's a lot of confusion kind of about this statute, or not the statute, but what the public trust doctrine says. And then at least my interpretation of it is the surfer has the view that you just discussed, that I don't need a badge to access the ocean if I'm just going surfing. If I'm sitting on the beach, it's different, but if I'm just going surfing, I don't need a badge. And I think the police officer has a different interpretation of the law, which he's going off what the Belmar ordinance says, which, maybe we can talk about that, if that's in line with the public ordinance.
Let's read the first line of the Belmar ordinance, which I think is invalid on its face and is ripe for a challenge.
Make sure that mic's close to you, just so we can get this. You can move the mic too, Andrew, whatever works for you.
Belmar Beachfront and Marine Regulations, Section 18-2.4. Each and every person entering upon and using the beachfront of the borough, whether for the purposes of using the water adjacent thereto for bathing or swimming or otherwise, shall obtain and display a badge.
That's a clear violation of the public trust
Clear
doctrine.
violation.
And the DEP regs too, right?
And the DEP regs and the Army Corps regs from which these beaches were replenished.
Yeah. So what controls? Is it the public trust doctrine? Is it the municipality's ordinance? Like, what controls and why?
Yeah, talk about the supremacy clause to the Constitution.
Yeah, so the state law always trumps municipal ordinances. So the fact that Murphy, it doesn't have to go further than that. The fact that Murphy signed into law the public trust doctrine as a statute in 2019 means that this ordinance, I believe, is invalid on its face because it doesn't talk about the right of the public to simply walk on the dry sand without being charged.
Yeah, listen. So one thing, so I heard from people that the kid's a nice kid, and then I heard from other people trying to say the kid's not none of that's relevant. You know, when I hear uninformed people say that the surfer, oh, I heard he you know,
They had issues the day before.
yeah, something like that. That reminds me of like when they were trying to justify the George Floyd situation. Like, oh, you should look at his background. Like the fact that that officer murdered George Floyd's background is like 100% irrelevant. And this surfer's background is 100% irrelevant. I heard his background's great and he's a nice kid, but anyone that wants to say otherwise, it's just irrelevant to the situation. And you know, the officer is highly trained. He's a class 2 with a weapon. He needs to be better than that. Like you need to be better. Aren't they supposed to be aren't they supposed to be above that and used to taking, you know, and responding properly with, you know.
I think at the core of this is essentially that you just have two interpretations of something, and you have a police officer who thinks that he's doing the right thing and he's trying to enforce the law as it's written. And who's to say whether this officer knows, oh, well, the public trust doctrine actually says this. I would assume...
But the trooper that pulls you over, Mark, for going 66 on the Parkway, isn't he just trying to do the right thing and enforce the law as written?
Yeah, absolutely. So, but I think the problem, though, is that the law as written, as Andrew pointed out, is probably not correct. And the surfer has the correct interpretation, it looks like, at least based on what we're talking about. So the surfer thinks that he's in the right. The police officer thinks that he's in the right because he's enforcing the law as he knows it through the ordinance. And then when that interaction becomes the surfer trying to say, no, I'm not going to listen to you because I think I'm right, that's when it escalates and escalates. And how you de-escalate it further, I think, becomes the bigger conversation. And I just, again, just going back to the prosecutor office days and things, by, you know, the surfer then being like, no, I'm not going to comply with your directive.
Listen,
the idea, and again, we're sitting in a conference room.
Exactly.
We're all lawyers, like, and
exactly.
All that.
In a perfect world.
Of course. And I just got to get out the one thing I always took away. And I was telling Andrew, I had the quote like wrong in my brain for years. But it's Supreme Court case law that says that you don't get to be the judge. I'm still going to get it wrong. You don't get to essentially be... You cannot be the judge of your own case while you're on the street, or I guess in this case, the beach. Like, you don't get to judge your own case on the street. Let the police officer do his job, and then the forum is the courts. Okay. Again, that's in a vacuum in a perfect world. In reality, this guy's like, I'm at the beach, I'm surfing, I'm coming out of the ocean. What are you talking about? No, like my whole life I've been coming here. I don't need a badge. And then he's like, all right, well, I'm going to leave, and it turns into this bigger thing than it should have. I think that's absolutely a conversation that's probably beyond at least my expertise, like how you avoid these escalation situations. And I think a phenomenal thing out of all this is these body cams. I think because it keeps the police accountable, it provides the full context, I think, or at least more of the context, instead of a he said, she said.
Right. I just don't want to live in a world where I'm walking out of the water surfing and being
100%.
accosted by an armed officer in an aggressive tone asking for a beach badge when, oh, by the way, under the DEP regs and Governor Murphy's pronouncement, I'm right. Like, that's the problem, among the problems.
Well, 100%. And I'm again, not to be a politician, but I'm not sitting here taking sides either.
Of course, yeah.
You know, again, as a human being, you sit here, you watch what looks like a kind of young
See, Mark floated this opinion to me a couple of days ago. I said, Mark, save it for the podcast. It'll make for a better podcast if I'm getting your view for the
another interesting aspect of this is if the 28-year-old surfer has the correct interpretation of the law above and beyond what's on the books in Belmar and the police and the chief, right? If the 28-year-old surfer is right and Belmar is not compliant with the public trust doctrine, they can actually be removed from cost share on future replenishment projects. So, and they would be forced to pay millions of dollars to replenish their beaches because they're not consistent with the public trust doctrine.
But who ultimately really gets punished for that? Like,
well, the public would ultimately get punished, but
well,
they would never let that happen. They would sooner be more consistent. So I'll tell you a story with everything that happened in Deal. Ultimately, what happened was after 4 or 5 years of negative press in Deal, you know, this caught the attention of the legislatures, and I started talking to Senator Gopal, And he got on our side, went to the DEP, talked to the Army Corps, issued a letter from the DEP that I know he had a big hand in that said, if you keep passing these parking ordinances that restrict beach access, we're taking away any and all future funding for beach replenishment, and the town is going to have to foot the entire bill. So usually it's 65% federal, 25% state, and then the town, has a small cost share. They threaten them with basically millions of dollars to keep their beaches, and we haven't heard from Deal since then. So that could potentially happen in Belmar.
This all goes back to, not all, I mean, because the Belmar surfer being accosted for surfing is a bit different than the Deal situation, but it all revolves around the same thing, which is the use and enjoyment of these tidally flowed, really spiritual areas. And yeah.
Should we watch the video?
Well, I don't know. The video upsets me every time I watch it. I get in a bad mood. But this is the point I was making. So I saw a clip from Tulsi Gabbard. There's a clip from her where I guess she did some training in Seagirt.
The Army.
Army camp in Seagirt, which is very close to Belmar, some years ago. And I guess she was interviewed, and she was saying, she was saying something like, you can look it up. She's like, I just can't understand, like, in New Jersey, these beach badges. Like, how are you charging people to go to the beach? The beach is a spiritual place for everyone. And I might not agree with, some of Tulsi Gabbard's recent moves, but she certainly makes a lot of point in that clip that I saw.
That was going to be one of my questions too. I guess before we got to the video, if we were going to show it, is like, why is New Jersey unique in charging for beach badges? How do these other states like California, everywhere else up and down, have it figured out? They just work it into the real estate taxes. Like, why is New Jersey special?
Yeah, so Jersey is one of the only states that charges for beach access with badges. Other states, it's either some form of tourism tax, hospitality tax, local taxes go into it. Typically, I mean, let's be honest, we have a lot of people coming to the beach in New Jersey, right?
Mm-hmm. It's the most densely populated state in the nation. I believe.
It is a lot different than, a coastline in Hawaii where you can have a few visitors.
Or California, where you pull over anywhere and it's coastline.
So, I mean, there are some differences, but I think for the most part, Florida, there are some pay for parking situations. Perhaps there's like a state park fee in some areas of Florida, but nowhere where you actually have to take money out of your pocket to the same degree that we have in New Jersey and pay to get on the beach to a badge checker while you're on the boardwalk and you have like a view of the sand right in front of you, which I think is fundamentally, I'd rather be taxed out of the back end than have to pay over my hard-earned money to someone in the front end. It just doesn't feel as right,
a lot of this is philosophy, okay? It's philosophy, it's policy. Number one, New Jersey is one of the most densely populated, if not the most densely populated state in the nation. And I spent a lot of time in Puerto Rico. And the main beach we go to in Puerto Rico, and it's a philosophy thing, okay? The main beach we go to in Puerto Rico a lot of times is there's smoking, there's drinking, there's dogs, there's lifeguarding. I mean, or no lifeguards, there's surfing. Okay, like if that happened to that kid for that, I mean, like, again, there's no badges. People like you said, Andrew, people are laughing in Jersey, like, what are these badges? And there's a sense of freedom down there. Like when we go to this beach in Puerto Rico, the water's beautiful. Mm-hmm. The waves are great. People are drinking in the water. People are smoking cigarettes. People are surfing. But people also drowned frequently.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Because there's no lifeguards. The beaches are cleaned, So it really goes, a lot of it's philosophy. So why do we have lifeguards? We could have another episode on surfing access and one of these cases, I think it's State v. Burlington or something from like 1990, some surfers went out surfing and after a hurricane. And by the way, I know that day because I remember that day. The waves were about head high or a little overhead, which in today's standards is not a rough day. And it was a beautiful day. I forget the name of the hurricane, but so once the hurricane passes, it passes out to sea. And then what it does is it sucks, as the hurricane passes, it sucks the air towards the hurricane, which shifts the wind offshore, which makes like perfect waves. So that particular hurricane, does it say the name of the case or the year?
Well, it was 1999. It was State versus Oliver.
Yeah, that's the date of the Supreme.
It says severe tropical storm. I don't see
the name of it. All right. It happened in like, I think 95 or 96.
Probably by the time it got to the appellate division.
Yeah, it was 99. And it was a beautiful surfing day. It was about head-high waves. Now they go out surfing in double overhead, triple overhead videos. But back then, they said, oh, that's too dangerous, and they closed the beach to surfing. They just shut it down. No one's allowed there. And this is a beautiful, perfect surfing day. And surfers went out. They got whistled in. They weren't coming in, and they got arrested for surfing and charged with borough ordinances and stuff. And they fought it all the way up to the New Jersey Supreme Court, which found that the municipalities have the inherent police power to close the ocean for safety reasons and all that. But that would be the equivalent of a perfect powder day on Hunter Mountain or at, Killington in Vermont, perfect powder, and say, we're going to close the mountain because we don't want anyone to get caught in a tree well So a lot of this is a philosophy thing. And how clean do our beaches really need to be? Do we need the beach rake, this big piece of industrial machinery, barreling down the beach every night at 7 a.m., chasing people off their trying to enjoy the beach at night, while, by the way, this beach rake is kicking up a dust of silica behind it, which causes, silicosis and lung cancer. Do we need that every day? Do we need lifeguards on every beach every day? And what's the philosophy we want, like law and order. Gotta have law and order. You know?
Well, it's funny because it's like the philosophical side of it is, again, we talked about like you're still lifeguarding, like part-time. I lifeguarded. It was one of the best jobs I ever had. It was the best job I ever had. So you think about the benefits, like, all right, you get employment for people. Some of these, special officers that go on to have careers in law enforcement. My dad started out as a special and he became a police chief like years later. There's a lot of benefits to that, but it's just, you're right. Like, how do you kind of marry the two? Like, I think about like one time we went out to California, like you and I both went out for a case. And I remember like seeing the lifeguards there and I was having a conversation with one of them and like mid conversation, she'd sprint out, go make a rescue, come back in, start talking again. And I was like, this is the coolest thing. Like, I thought that was so cool. It's like a full profession out there. It's not like, you do it like on the side or before you go back to college. And like, how do they do it? Like, how do they make that work where it's essentially they're salaried employees? It's I think
because I wasn't sure if I agreed with your ban beach badges, but then I thought about it and I said, this situation is so bad, I signed your petition. Because the thing about beach badges, so, okay, let's say you have your philosophy where we don't want people drowning. We're not going to be Puerto Rico where we have no lifeguards and it's anyone can do whatever they want for the most part, but we're going to have people drowning a lot. By the way, in Puerto Rico, I've been on like 2 or 3 saves because the surfers are the lifeguards in this one particular beach. It's pretty crazy. So, but once you establish what you want, I lost my train.
No, it's just like with the badges and everything. Like, is it still worth having them? What's the solution? What's the alternative?
Exactly. Back to the badges. I used to think maybe it should be a state badge. Okay, we'll still have badges, but it'll be one badge that you can get on any beach because, like, if you live in Belmar, well, maybe I'd like to go down to Bayhead and go to that beach once in a while, or maybe check out, Monmouth Beach. So I was in favor of like a state badge to get you on any beach because the thing about the badges is it's like a targeted tax. If you're using those services, you're paying into it. So that's the only thing. But then this situation was so upsetting that I saw this. I said, let's get rid of badges altogether. So anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I had the idea to, quote unquote, decriminalize NJ Beach Access. I mean, it's kind of like a buzzword, and it stands out, and that's why I wanted to use it for a petition. But when you think about it, you know, if you don't have a beach badge on a guarded beach, then you're criminalized for not being there for the right purposes, or in contrast to a municipal ordinance. So, you know, I think that there are other ways to pay for lifeguards and maintenance, and we don't need to have a beach industrial complex that's run by
I like that.
that's
Yeah.
run by the military. It can be a little more relaxed.
It's funny you say that. Have you ever seen like the Hummers like driving up and down? Sometimes the camouflage.
Yes.
Every once in a while, you talk about like a beach industrial complex, or yeah.
Exactly, right?
The beach rake is a real problem. I really don't agree with the beach rake. So they have these beach rakes in some of these towns. And one particular town has 2 beach rakes. And at about 6:30 every night, sometimes the best time at the beach is from like 4:30 till dark.
Golden hour.
Golden hour.
The
Yeah.
golden
Yep.
hour.
Exactly.
Until this, this rumbling,
Chuk, chuk, chuk.
large piece of industrial machinery being pulled on an enormous tractor is rumbling down the beach within feet of people. And I've seen these guys, like, people will run out of the way with their thing, you know, and people have been killed. If you Google it, people have been killed and run over by beach rakes. I think there was happening in California or something. And then the other thing too is if you look at the back of the beach rake, it's kicking up a cloud of silica because it's grinding the sand and causing this dust, which in my opinion is terrible for the operator, because read about silica and silicosis. Silicosis is the dust from sand, or the silica. Very bad. And then it's done in some towns every day at the golden hour, and it's terrible. And it's all, I heard the beach rakes don't even pick up a lot of debris. It's really just, I mean, you ever hear the thing Footprints in the Sand?
Yeah.
One of the most beautiful poems ever. Well, the beach rake wants to get rid of that, as though the footprints in the sand would never exist. I mean, they're raking the beach literally to get rid of the footprints, and they're doing it every day.
Yeah, there's no point to that. But you'd think with, you know, $40 billion industry, you know, people coming from all over the place to come to the shore, there's so much money in the beach and in tourism that we can find an alternate funding solution.
And the idea is, too, I can't remember if we hit on this, is that the money that the municipalities, that the towns make from selling beach badges is supposed to get reinvested back into the beaches themselves.
And only into the beaches.
And I've seen, like, I think maybe on your page recently, someone did, like, the calculations, and they're like, there's, like, at least $1 million surplus if you do the basic salaries of, you know, lifeguards, badge checkers, people cleaning up the beach. Like, how does that actually play out?
The surplus is supposed to be refunded through reduced beach fees to the public, which you only hear about beach fees going up. You never hear about them going down. So that's a whole nother issue. I want to know where the money is going. But I guarantee you, if you send an Oprah request to many of the shore towns and you get their budgets and you find out where the money's going, you'll be unpleasantly surprised.
And they're not supposed to commingle the funds. They're supposed to be a separate account.
Yeah.
So that these beach badge fees are only used for the lifeguards, clean the beach, badge checkers itself. They're not supposed to go to raise or lower the taxes of the people in the town.
And I think that's what the prior litigation in Belmar was about, either Susco or Slocum v. Belmar. They were commingling the funds. This came to light. There was litigation. They were found to be in violation because you can't commingle the funds. You have to have a separate beach fund separate from your general fund, which I mean, I would assume that Belmar is probably doing that accurately now because they actually had to deal with the litigation in the past.
Let's take a break.